Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Morning Coffee and a Thought. Today, I want to take a couple of thoughts from the latter part of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 24, and two parables that Jesus will utter that are recorded in Matthew chapter 25. All of this covers the subject of time, or more specifically, a delay, a time delay. And we'll get back to our thought in just a moment. First of all, I want to remind you that Morning Coffee and a Thought can be seen on our Wings of Faith YouTube channel beginning at 1 p.m. on Friday afternoons. And you can see it on our Facebook page beginning at 8 o'clock on Sunday mornings. We hope you will join us. And if these thoughts or words minister to you, we pray that you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. And we thank you for that. And now back to our thought. In Matthew 24, Jesus ends that chapter talking about his return once he has left during their time. And in chapter 25, we want to talk about two parables in which Jesus expands on that thought. In Matthew chapter 25, the first parable has to do with a Jewish wedding ceremony. Now, ceremonies, or the process of getting married back in Israel during the first century, took place in three stages. First of all, there was the commitment of the two families for the marriage to happen. Next, there was sort of the engagement. That happened at the bride's house, where gifts were exchanged between the families. And then finally, about a year later, came the actual wedding ceremony. And that was done in a particular way. It would all start at the groom's house. The groom and his party would leave about sunset and head to the bride's home. There would be some festivities at her place, and then there would be a long procession back to the place where the ceremony would be held, and that was usually at the groom's house. And the festivities would then last about a week. It is against that backdrop that Jesus tells us this first parable. He says there were 10 bridesmaids. Of course, they would be waiting with the bride at her home, waiting for that arrival of the bridegroom. There were 10 of them, and Jesus says 5 of them were wise, 5 of them were foolish. And so they waited, but of course sunset for the Jews was at 6 o'clock at night. And so they waited and waited and waited. And it wasn't until 6 hours later at midnight came out the call that the bridegroom was arriving. Well, all the bridesmaids in this parable had fallen asleep. The difference between the bridesmaids was that 5 of them had prepared in case that exact thing had happened, that there was a long delay in the bridegroom coming. And that's exactly what happened. All 10 fell asleep, but 5 of them had brought extra oil just in case the bridegroom took a long time coming. When the announcement was given that he had arrived, 5 of them did not have enough oil to make that procession back to the house of the groom where the wedding feast and ceremony would commence. And so they asked the 5 wise ones if they would share their oil in order for them to trim their lamps and have enough in their lamps to make it back to the groom's house. The 5 wise ones, not knowing how long that procession would be, said, "No, there might not be enough for both you and us. Go to those who sell oil and get your oil from them, and then join the procession back to the grooms." The parable goes on to say that while the 5 foolish virgins were getting their oil, the bridegroom arrived. And so the 5 wise ones went on the procession back to the groom's house. The foolish ones got probably left behind so far that by the time they arrived at the wedding ceremony, the parable says the door was shut. They knocked, but all the reply was, I never knew you. The second parable that Jesus will expound again deals with time delay. In this case, there are 3 stewards. The master of the home is going to leave on a long journey. And so he decides he's going to trust his own wealth with his stewards. The scriptures say the parable lays out what he gave to these stewards based on their current ability as he saw it. To the first steward, he gave 5 talents, or in the NIV, 5 bags of gold. To the second servant, he gave him 2 bags of gold. And to the third servant, he gave 1 talent, or 1 bag of gold. Again, as in the first parable, and this is key, the journey was a long time. And so these servants had an extended period of time in order to deal with the wealth they had been given. After that extended period, the master returns home. And he wants to settle the accounts with those that he gave his wealth to. The first steward comes to him and says that with his 5 bags of gold, or 5 talents, he received 5 more. He doubled his wealth. The master commends him and says, come and share in my happiness and joy, and I'm going to give you responsibility over many more things because you've shown yourself to be a very wise and enterprising servant. The second servant comes and tells the master that he's earned 2 more bags of silver to add to what he already had. Again, like the first, he is commended by the master for his endeavors. Finally, the third servant will come before his master. But his story is going to be much different than the first 2. First of all, he blames the master for his own behavior. He says, because of my view of you, I simply took your bag of silver, or your 1 talent, and I hid it in the ground. Here is what belongs to you. The master, who had commended the other 2, now rebukes the final servant and throws him out of the house. Both of these parables relate to what Jesus had said in Matthew chapter 24, when he talked about his return. He will go on to say in Matthew 24, when I return, how am I going to find you? He then lays out that there's going to be a long interval between his first visit to earth and his second return. He says, if you are endeavoring in your projects and your abilities that I have given you, it's going to turn out good. But if you, because of the extended period of time, change your behavior, get lazy, and act like I'm never coming back, for those servants, it's going to be a much different story. And as we have found out, it has been an extended period of time between the first time Jesus came to earth as a babe and the second time when he will return as Lord, Master, and King. The question becomes the question in these parables. Number 1, are we prepared for that long interval in between the 2 appearances of Christ? That's what the first parable was all about. 5 of those bridesmaids or virgins were never prepared for the long delay and found themselves in a bad spot when the bridegroom finally came. The second parable was about a servant who did not continue on with his mission and endeavors, but instead hid the wealth of his master in the ground. Out of these parables, Jesus was telling us that when he returns, he's looking for two things. Number one, are we prepared? No matter how long it takes for the master to return, will we be ready and aware of his appearing or be caught off guard? Secondly, will we be partaking in the mission that he gave us? Will we continue on with the work he gave us, tenaciously working at the gifts and the mission that God has bestowed on all of us? All of us have a ministry. Christ gave us that ministry when we came to him. And when he returns, no matter how long it will be before that return, he will be expecting us to be faithful in doing the mission that he has given us to do with the gifts he has given us. That's my thought today. Two questions. Are we prepared for the return of Jesus Christ, no matter how long that return may be? And secondly, at this time in our life, are we endeavoring to do the job and the mission that God gave us with the gifts he bestowed upon us? That's my thoughts for today. Have a great day, enjoy your coffee, and we'll see you again next week.